Well, welcome to the first The Right You Industry Dialogue. Today we're going to address a very interesting question, and that relates to your career. Whether you are a student currently studying and looking forward to your first job, or if you are, even just sourcing for a university, and deciding which subject to pursue and which career to go for. I think this is a very good session, a very important one. And we are very glad today, to have Mr. David Goh with us today. He is the former general manager of Daimler Mobility, and he would like to share with us a little bit about his hiring experience and how you can also align yourself, to maximize your career opportunity. Right. So thank you very much, Mr. David Goh, for joining us today. Maybe I can quickly ask you to introduce yourself a little, to the audience.
Sure. Hi, everyone. As Kalak has already mentioned, my name is David Goh, the former general manager for Daimler Mobility. So my previous career history includes management consulting. I've been an ex-entrepreneur myself before I step into a corporate environment in Daimler. And my previous responsibility is to manage mobility services for the APAC region.
Right. So you've been in many roles over the past years, and I'm sure you have also been in a hiring position.
Yes.
Interviewing candidates and choosing, the right candidates for the various kind of jobs that you have available. Would you be able to share with us, a little bit about your typical hiring process? It's probably different for different industries, but it would be good to hear from you.
Well, I guess my experience revolving from a service side in consulting to a startup and also within a corporate paints a different perspective in which how I embark my hiring process. And everything boils down to demand of the organization. What is the demand? What's the strategy that the organization is heading towards? And I can distinctively break them down into very strategic positions and also very operational positions. So actually operational positions in that sense, there's always a very structured process of hiring where you have also specific channels that you will reach out to, like for instance, recruiters, LinkedIn, Jobs Portal, where you could actually place your ads. For more strategic positions, this is where you embark in networks, more of referrals and recommendations. And the fact is that because a lot of strategic positions are a lot more fluid, and so sometimes you cannot define using job descriptions or proper job descriptions.
Right. So you mentioned about using referrals as a means to seek job. Would you like to comment a little bit more about that aspect? Is that a real strategy in today's world? I mean, is that useful versus, for example, the individual's experience or strength or academic excellence, for example?
Well, referrals is always a double-edged sword. It's either you get a good referral from a trusted source or you don't. And the other aspect is to also source from the open market, which is the other end of the spectrum. So as a experienced hiring manager myself, I look into both aspects of it. Why referral would work is because you know that you would have trusted sources where you could actually rely on in terms of their recommendation. And so this is where sometimes you will ask within the networks of your acquaintance or people that you would work with before, and you would gather from them, hey, you have an individual like this or close to this that could do a certain kind of work strategically. And if you do, refer them to me.
Right. So that's from the hiring aspect, knowing individuals in your community who has contact with students or graduates or potential employees. But how about coming from the employees? Coming from a fresh graduate, would referral be important? From their aspects, whether they should be widely networking to make themselves known, that they are seeking a job in the industry.
Obviously, I think as a fresh grad, and also if I could also pin some parts of my experience as a fresh grad, we all been through that journey before, and how we would seek for jobs. Having networks do help, but what I will actually encourage for fresh grads to have is actually tangible work experience. And I'm not saying that you need to work like 5-10 years. I mean that's not realistic.
Especially for a fresh graduate.
Exactly. So, but embark yourself on pro bono projects, industrial projects where you could get yourself indulged between 3 to 6 months, doing something for a corporate, for a startup, sometimes even for free. That's why I say pro bono, and get that experience, because what's happening is through that experience, referrals would come, because if I were to be a company and I have benefited from your value add as a student or even as a fresh grad before, definitely I would recommend you to my networks and say, this is a fresh grad that has done work for me, great valuable work, and I recommend him to my networks.
Right. So it's working to get the experience, but also in a sense, widening the network and hoping that acquaintances that you meet at the internship will provide that referral needed for yourself. No, that's great. So we know that there's been a lot of changes in the technology side of things. LinkedIn didn't quite exist in the present form 10 years ago, and LinkedIn now is very heavily used by a lot of hirers and also potentially people who wants to get hired. And there's social media as well. So how do you think all these changes in landscape have changed the way hiring process is being done? And what are the things that maybe fresh graduates have to look out for or have to prepare themselves in view of this new landscape of hiring?
I think the fresh grads for this generation, or even one generation before the current, were already exposed to the likes of social medias and the likes of online networks. So I don't think LinkedIn, the platforms like LinkedIn, would be something challenging for them to embrace. I think what is really important is for fresh graduates to get on such platforms, build a profile around it, and if I can taper back to my previous answer, get your projects, get the works that you have done published, and this gives you added credential. And on that note, a CV with, take for instance, a project experience would probably stand out much more than a CV with just a graduate degree.
Right. Okay. So having actually some substantial work to kind of augment the academic side of the CV.
Yeah, okay. You're right.
That's great. How about with social media, there's a lot that individuals will share about themselves, and sometimes even if they're not put on the CV, the hirer will go and do their own checks and all that. Is this something that you will do, or hirers will do? Is it something that graduates should be very clean about their online presence as part of keeping their profile complete and flaw free?
I think you don't have to be flaw free. I mean, no one is flawless to begin with, and if you have committed errors or you have committed mistakes in the past, be ready to embrace it. I think that's the frame of confidence. Confidence is not being perfect in everything that you do, but confidence is embracing the fact that you know that you would get wrong at certain things.
Right.
And the way that I look into hiring candidates, I like that part of the confidence, that they're willing to try, willing to fail, but at the same time motivated to bring it across to the next level.
Right. So it's keeping themselves as real as possible, isn't
exactly.
If you hide, you probably it probably means that there's some fishiness around your profile. Yeah. So speaking of profiling yourselves, I guess the resume, the CV is probably one of the first thing that a hirer will look at.
Mm-hmm.
So other than the academic grades, which individuals will obviously put in, not so much grades, I guess, academic qualification, and also the projects that you mentioned. And are there any other things that individuals should look out for, when preparing a resume, a resume that actually stands out?
Yeah. If you talk about hiring managers, I mean, for hiring managers, I think we get tons of CVs. So clearly, succinctly, concise way of representing your credentials, I think that's really important. What's really cool out there is that there are already available templates that fresh graduates could actually make use of to build their CV on it and putting the right content on it. And what they could do is to constantly refresh the CV. One of the things that I feel fresh grads or even anyone in the job market, whether they are fresh grads or experienced hire, they should be customizing each CV for every single job.
Right.
Yeah, because
So there's no one size fit all.
well, I mean, it's somehow you would probably need to augment a little bit. I mean, you being you, but you working for one job would be different from you working for the other job. I think the best analogy that I have, if you sell a lemon to a chef and sell a lemon to a lemonade stand, it's the same product, but they'll use it differently. How would you sell yourself?
Right. So I guess it's putting the skill sets or featuring the right skill sets that will fit into the requirements of the specific jobs that you're applying to. Right. So, yes, you see a lot of CVs, but are there any particular aspects of the CV that you would look out for? In, I guess, first of all, doing the first run, of sieving out or shortlisting candidates. More specifically, I think this is also to address a lot of what our students have in terms of their concerns is, whether hirers will actually look at the university that the student or the applicant have graduated from and decide on the shortlist based on that. I guess that's the quickest way. Or, maybe they've done some very interesting qualifications that, might make them stand out. So what are the various aspects that you look out for, in your first vet of first look?
Yeah. For explicit or for very specific skill sets, like for instance, if you need to be a electrical engineer, you probably need a certain level of certifications to attain the PE, professional engineer status. So there's always a certain steps that a engineer would need to do in order to get to that stage. So by far, if there are certain roles, like even for financial people, that they have to go through CFAs, those will be by default the kind of certifications or recognition that they need to attain. And for that, I do not put them as really high priority, but I put them as you should already have those. And before you even apply for it.
Right. So it's a necessity.
Exactly.
It needs to be in the CV.
So, but then again, for the more unique roles, or I would say the more unique roles that doesn't require certain form of chartered certifications or registrations and so on and so forth, those on top of just the basic degree or masters that they have, typically I look at uniqueness in the candidate through the kind of things that they do out of school,
right,
out of work. So someone may be a fresh grad or someone may be a graduate with 1 or 2 years experience. So you would typically see a very standard CV with 1 or 2 years experience with the academic achievement. I like to look into people that has, for instance, involvement in community, in volunteering work. At the same time, earlier on, I touched on side projects. Do they do something after hours, after their work,
right.
To keep them enriched? Not just by going through training and courses, but really creating something out of value, maybe not really making money out of it, but just impacting the world or impacting some people that will benefit from what they build.
Right. So in other words, it's not just the academic achievement. Of course, that's kind of important, I guess. But on top of that, whether the person is a complete person, whether he or she can operate outside of the academic circle and do something that's real, in the workforce. So that's all quite interesting. And so other than their ability to do unique or constructive activities outside of school, are there any other attributes they will look for? Whether they are creative or whether they take on certain hobbies, whether they are sportsmen, things like that. Are those important?
Those will be peripheral attributes, I would say. And I don't want to sound too discriminate over here. And there are certain positions or certain roles that requires require one to be very competitive. So this is where I would also look into, take for instance, do you do some forms of competitive sports? Do you get involved in some form of competition before? Like for instance, if I look into business developers, I look for the hunger in that person to develop the business, to enter a new market. I look for that, and sometimes it doesn't quite say it on the CV itself, but through the interaction with the candidate, you'll probably be able to get that out.
Right. So I guess that means giving them a shot at the interview and seeing what they have to say.
Yeah.
Right. Well, speaking of interview, I guess when it comes to a candidate being shortlisted, they have to face the manager at the end of the as part of the process. This is actually, I think, I suspect, a jittery moment for a lot of candidates, because this is, in a sense, there's a lot that they can prepare, but yet there's a lot of uncertainty around that session. What kind of questions is going to be asked, whether there will be surprises and all, in terms of the frame of mind, the questions that comes up. From your perspective, what would be the kind of things that candidates should do, to prepare themselves before, during, maybe even after the interview, to maximize their performance?
One of the best things that I will always encourage some of the people that I counsel in terms of career counseling, it's before a interview, start to get yourself indulged in that industry by talking to people in that industry.
Right.
Whether is it, you have ex-classmates or schoolmates, they are in that field. Pick up the phone, talk to them for 30 minutes, get the lingo, get familiarized with the lingo. If you have someone that's really senior that you could reach out to, like take for instance a professor within your university that's in that particular area before, reach out to him and seek his advice. What are the things he would think that he or she would think that this position would need to give value back to the organization, and what are the things that this kind of organization would look for from someone that probably would have really been through the industry before.
Right.
And
so that when you speak, you sound like you are someone from the industry and not someone trying to jump into the industry.
Well, the best thing that I could say is don't go in totally green. I think, yes, you may not have the experience, but it's about investing the time to learn, investing the time to get familiarized with it, and getting familiarized with it helps you, gives you the edge in the hiring process. But you have to be upfront to the hiring manager to tell them that I have no experience, but what I've done over the past couple of days or weeks is to get myself involved in such discussions, to be familiarized with it. These are additional attributes a hiring manager would probably see, that you take this job seriously, take this interview seriously, that you try to build the knowledge behind it.
Right, that you've done some homework.
And not just by desktop research on internet, but really by talking to people.
I see. And I guess you can bring out some examples during the interview as an interviewee. Right. And is there any tricks behind the follow-up to an interview? How a candidate should they write a letter of thanks or give a call? What would be your best advice?
Well, I guess
after interview.
In a lot of cases, thank you email would probably be sufficient. Right. And if you are really eager to get the job, do periodic follow-ups. I think what I meant by periodic follow-ups could be something between 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and do that. Sometimes you may not have the hiring manager's contact, but go through the HR or the agency to do that kind of follow-ups. And like, for instance, sometimes the hiring manager would be a little bit more secretive or have that boundary to not share his contact details. So what he could do is write directly to the HR and say, please forward this to the hiring manager, and get that through, because that's an additional effort that a applicant would do that probably the hiring manager would see.
Right. I guess if the hiring manager gets an email from the candidate, even as he or she hides all the details, I guess that's a good indication of the interview or the candidate's determination and resourcefulness.
Exactly.
Right. I guess just reversing back a bit about the interview process. I guess many candidates are quite concerned sometimes with unusual questions. I mean, the typical ones like describe your strength and weakness. I think those they can prepare. But sometimes I guess there are tricky or out of whack questions. Questions that are unrelated to the job or at least seemingly unrelated. Do you practice? Issuing questions like that, giving questions to surprise the candidate. And if you do, what are you actually looking out for, when you surprise them that way?
Well, I think in the VUCA world, like what many people always say is that things happens and in a very extraordinary fashion. I mean, just take for instance COVID and Corona. This is something that is unpredictable. So in many cases, for very important positions, yes, such question would be thrown at them to see how they will actually react to it. And sometimes they may not even get to the right answer. But it's how they actually try to manage that situation. It's a lot on situation management, on what they would do at the point of time to help them overcome the situation.
Right. I guess oftentimes there's no right or wrong answer to some of these tricky questions.
It is.
Maybe it's a question of morals or ethics or debatable. I guess maybe sometimes it's just seeing how they logically address an issue.
One of the typical questions that I always ask is that was there a situation where you in your past experience that you felt your integrity being challenged?
Well, that's a tough one.
Explain the situation and what you have done.
Right. So telling a white lie, for example, is that correct? Right. Well, that's interesting insight. So other than that, do you have any other advice, for our job seekers, in this climate, particularly given now with COVID, we see more retrenchments than hires. Any advice that you have, from the hiring perspective?
I guess at this point of time where the economy is still trying to correct itself and employers in many sense would have hiring freezes. I think what fresh graduates or prospective employees can really do is really keep trying. I think now is a time where confidence could be dampened, but at the same time try not to let that affect your expectation and also the way that you try to get yourself into a new position. That's just one aspect. The other aspect is for people that are still trying to seek their job, try to seek a good job, even for fresh grad or whatsoever, or for experienced hire. Another way, it's constantly get yourself into a reading mode or learning mode, and pick up a topic that either interests you or something that is distantly remote from what you are doing primarily. Because in many senses, you never know, maybe you could be fitted for another industry, and no one hires you and train you to do the job. People hire you when you are already prepared for it. And so this is why I say constant learning is always so important, and be as well-read as possible, and read really widely.
Right. So I guess with the economic climate right now, if an individual is in the industry, that's really tough, would you suggest that he or she continue with further studies, perhaps in a different area to widen his or her chances, or maybe to do internship work or pro bono work, just to get the referrals or the network that we discussed earlier? What is your recommendation
for those that can afford another education? Obviously, I think they could pick up now diploma, pick up now degree program, and maybe embark that for the next 2 years. I think this would be a good time to tide through the crisis period. For those that can't afford it, obviously that's something that they have to find some other alternatives. And exactly you mentioned, could be a side gig, a side projects where you could either make them additional money or give them the additional experience for the age for their next job.
Right. Well, I hope that Certainly, I hope that the hiring climate will improve. It should, it will. But in the meantime, I hope that you have taken some of David's advice. Right. Thank you, David. Thank you so much for your insight. It's been very valuable. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, in case this is the first time that you are dialing into our seminar, this is actually the first of many industry dialogues that we're going to have, and it's held in conjunction with the Right You Fair. Right, the Right You Fair is going to run for 2 weeks, starting on the 21st of September and all the way till 4th of October. Please tune in to www.therighteU.com/fair, and you'll be able to see a whole lineup of seminars and industry dialogues. They're all very interesting, so please tune in. All right, we'll see you there.